In recent weeks, the international agenda has once again focused on the confrontation between the United States and China. The trade war, which began during Donald Trump's presidency, is now formally on pause. However, this pause resembles more a calm before the storm than a path to compromise. Neither side shows any willingness to make concessions, and negotiations are at a deadlock. According to sources in Beijing cited by Financial Times and Nikkei Asia, the Chinese delegation hinted to Washington during closed consultations that it is ready to consider introducing new protectionist measures, including potential tariffs of up to 300% on American electric vehicles sold in China. Such a move would deliver a severe blow to the entire American automotive industry. The Chinese market is the largest in the world and essentially indispensable for any major car manufacturer. Tesla would be particularly affected, as China has become a key driver of the company's growth in recent years. Bloomberg estimates that more than 40% of Tesla's sales come from China, and the Shanghai factory supplies the bulk of global demand. Losing access to Chinese consumers would pose an existential threat to Elon Musk. Tesla could go from being a global leader to a company struggling to survive. Insiders in Washington cited by Politico report that this ultimatum was delivered by the Chinese delegation during recent consultations, when the sides were attempting to find a compromise on several contentious issues. No agreement was reached. Trump, who bases his policy on slogans about protecting American jobs, sees China's threats as a direct interference in the U.S. economy. Xi Jinping, on the other hand, demonstrates firmness, signaling that China is ready to defend its interests and capable of exploiting vulnerabilities in the American economy. American think tanks, including Brookings Institution and the Council on Foreign Relations, warn that if these tariffs are implemented, the consequences for the United States would be catastrophic. First, tens of thousands of jobs in the automotive sector would be at risk. Second, financial markets have already begun reacting. Tesla shares and those of other electric vehicle manufacturers are showing increased volatility, and investors are increasingly factoring in scenarios of sharp sales declines. The problem extends beyond the auto industry. The U.S. is deeply integrated into the Chinese economy, and any escalation would inevitably affect American corporations as a whole. Tech giants like Apple, Qualcomm, and Nvidia depend on Chinese production and consumption. Any retaliatory measures by Beijing could disrupt their supply chains and revenues. Washington is well aware of this. According to the Wall Street Journal, discussions in the White House are intensifying. Some advisors urge Trump to take a hard line and push the conflict to the limit, while others counsel compromise, warning that failure to do so could drag the U.S. into a full-scale economic crisis. In Beijing, officials believe this is the ideal time to apply pressure. The Chinese economy is indeed facing difficulties, but the country still controls key global supply chains and can afford to take risks. Moreover, for Chinese authorities, it is also a matter of prestige. Conceding to Trump domestically would be perceived as a defeat, which is unacceptable for political stability. The paradox is that the outcome of this confrontation will affect not only the economies of the two powers, but also the global electric vehicle market as a whole. If China closes its doors to Tesla, local manufacturers such as BYD, XPeng, and NIO will gain a massive advantage. This would shift the balance of power in the market of the future, where electric vehicles are seen as the main driver of the transportation revolution. As Reuters Breakingviews notes, in such a scenario, the United States could ultimately lose the race for leadership in this industry. All attention is now focused on the upcoming talks between Trump and Xi Jinping. Diplomatic sources in Brussels cited by Euractiv report that China intends to use the tariff issue as its main leverage, forcing the United States to ease its sanctions policy in other areas. Essentially, this is about a major deal. Beijing is willing to sacrifice some of its interests in exchange for relief from pressure in strategically important sectors. For now, however, the dialogue is at a deadlock. Behind the scenes, there are growing concerns that the world is on the brink of a new global trade war that could involve not only the US and China, but also their allies. Europe is already uneasy. Brussels fears that if tensions escalate, it will have to choose a side, which could lead to divisions within the European Union. The situation is extremely alarming. China has made a move that could destabilize the American auto industry, and, with it, the entire US economy. Now it all depends on whether Trump can reach an agreement with Xi, or whether the world will witness a new phase of confrontation, the consequences of which will affect everyone, from factory workers to investors on Wall Street. As Financial Times notes, today we are witnessing not just a dispute over tariffs, but a struggle for the future of the global economy. The reaction of US allies and major global players deserves special attention, as the Washington-Beijing trade war has long ceased to be just their internal affair. In Brussels, concerns are growing. Europe is caught between two giants. On one hand, the EU is economically closely tied to China. Many member states trade actively with Beijing, especially Germany, whose automotive industry depends on the Chinese market almost more than the American one. On the other hand, political loyalty to the US, particularly after Trump's rise to power and his hardline rhetoric, forces Europeans to demonstrate solidarity with Washington. As Der Spiegel notes, Berlin already understands that if Beijing imposes 300% tariffs on American electric vehicles, the next step could target European brands, primarily Volkswagen, Mercedes, and BMW. This could trigger a systemic crisis in European industry, which is already struggling with energy problems and high production costs. Asia is facing an equally complex situation. Japan and South Korea are long-standing US allies and major players in high technology. However, their corporations also rely heavily on the Chinese market and supply chains. According to Nikkei Asia, closed-door discussions are already underway in Tokyo on how to prepare for a scenario in which China sharply restricts Japanese and Korean companies' access to its domestic economy. The focus is particularly on semiconductors, where China could use its influence as a pressure tool. South Korean analysts at Yonhap News emphasize that if the US drags the region into a full-scale tariff war, the first at risk will be the supply of components for the global smartphone and electronics markets. The energy factor cannot be ignored. China is the largest importer of US liquefied natural gas, and many experts, including those at Reuters Breakingviews, believe Beijing could expand tariff measures to this sector at any moment. Such a move would collapse the revenues of American energy companies and put entire states that depend on gas and oil exports at risk. For Trump, this would deal a serious blow to his electoral base, as these regions traditionally vote Republican. Ultimately, we see that potential Chinese tariffs are not just an economic threat to the US auto industry. They are a strategic pressure tool capable of triggering cascading consequences, from stock market declines and an energy crisis to political instability within the United States itself. As Financial Times analysis emphasizes, Beijing is playing a long-term game, while Trump focuses on quick political victories ahead of the elections. It is precisely this difference in strategies that makes the conflict so dangerous. Each side is willing to go to the limit to avoid losing face, and any misstep could result in a global catastrophe for the world economy.